You think your family knows you? Try being seated in the kitchen at your own brother's wedding while your parents beam at the head table. That night, I realized I wasn't family in their eyes, just someone to keep things running. They expected silence, but 2 weeks later, I pulled the contract that tied our company to my new in-laws' empire, and the consequences shook everyone who had tried to erase me. My name is Sloan Hartwell. Numbers were my language, and I had spent years building Hartwell Construction into something solid. My brother Jackson carried the title and the charm, but I carried the company. People called him the golden child, easy smile, smooth talker, always adored. I was the one fixing his mistakes, keeping balance sheets straight, and making sure the lights stayed on. That had always been our family rhythm. He shined, I worked. When Jackson got engaged to Isadora Blackwood, it was more than a marriage. It was a business arrangement with her family's powerful real estate firm. I had negotiated the very contract that kept our company afloat, but at the engagement party, I was brushed aside like staff. Even Isadora's mother whispered about how managerial I looked, as if competence were something to be ashamed of. Still, nothing hit harder than the wedding itself. I had imagined at least being acknowledged as a sister, if not honored as the person who held the company together. Instead, the wedding planner led me through a maze of doors to a cramped space off the kitchen, where a wobbly table sat near the clatter of dishes. My name card waited there, placed among assistants and interns. When I caught Jackson's eye across the room, he shrugged as though it didn't matter. To him, it probably didn't. To me, it was the loudest message he had ever sent. You don't belong. I sat there listening to laughter spill from the ballroom, the music, the applause for their first dance. My own parents looked radiant beside their new in-laws, too distracted to notice my absence. I realized in that moment how invisible I had become in the family I had sacrificed everything for. Humiliation turned to fire. They wanted me small, but they forgot the quiet sister knew the numbers, the contracts, and the power buried in fine print. They dismissed me, but I held the one thing none of them had bothered to protect, the keys to the business they all relied on. That night, seated among strangers in the kitchen, I decided I wouldn't just reclaim my place. I would take back everything. Growing up, my brother Jackson had everything going for him. Teachers adored him, neighbors praised him, and even at home, he was treated like he could do no wrong. He was the kid who could talk his way out of anything, while I was the one sitting in my room with books, trying to make sense of things. From a young age, I was the one who quietly repaired the damage left in his wake. If he forgot an assignment, I helped him piece it together. If he got into trouble, I was the one smoothing it over with explanations. That balance carried into adulthood. He was the star everyone applauded, while I kept the machine running behind the curtain. After college, I had the option to leave. With my degree, I could have chosen a big city job with a hefty paycheck and no family strings attached. But I didn't. I came back because Hartwell Construction wasn't just a company. It was my father's legacy, and I believed it deserved someone steady. So I stepped into the role of chief financial officer. I managed the accounts, negotiated the contracts, and ensured every project stayed on track. My fingerprints were on every success, even if nobody outside the office knew it. Meanwhile, Jackson was handed the glamorous title of Vice President of Client Relations. His job was smiling on golf courses, buying long lunches, and claiming victories for deals that had been carefully built in spreadsheets on my desk. I didn't argue, though I noticed the difference in how people treated us. He walked into rooms like he belonged. I was expected to stay at my desk, invisible but essential. My father, Silas, reinforced that imbalance without meaning to. He always praised Jackson's ability to connect with people. He'd tell me, "Your brother is the face of this business. He brings in the deals, Sloan." That's just how it works. What he didn't see was that those very deals would have fallen apart if I hadn't been the one calculating risks, balancing budgets, and making sure promises could actually be delivered. Jackson was the welcome handshake, but I was the reason our clients kept coming back. It was exhausting, knowing that no matter how many hours I put in or how many crises I solved, I would always be considered secondary. I had accepted that role for years, thinking maybe being the quiet glue of the family business was enough. But looking back, I see how much it chipped away at me. While Jackson basked in admiration, I was made to believe that my worth was in staying silent and reliable, never demanding recognition. The truth is, Hartwell Construction would never have grown without my discipline and strategy. I carried the weight, but the spotlight always fell on him. That silent imbalance was the first betrayal I learned to live with, one that would later set the stage for everything that followed. When I think back to the years before everything fell apart, the difference between Jackson and me was always obvious. He had a way of drawing people in without effort. Teachers smiled at him, relatives spoiled him, and friends followed him around like he was someone special. I was the quiet one, more interested in studying than in shining. That contrast shaped how people saw us, and it shaped how we lived our lives. By the time we were adults, the pattern was already set. Jackson was the one everyone admired, while I was the one who made sure things actually worked. When I finished my MBA, I could have taken a position in a large firm far from home. I had offers that promised status and money, but I couldn't walk away from the company my father had built from the ground up. Hartwell Construction had been around my entire life, and I wanted to keep it alive. Taking the role of chief financial officer meant I was responsible for keeping the company stable. I managed payroll, oversaw budgets, and studied every detail of the contracts that came through our doors. Every decision I made had real weight, because one mistake could cost us everything. I knew the risks, and I carried them carefully. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real work that kept the company strong. Jackson, on the other hand, was given the role of vice president of client relations. That meant lunches with investors, trips to the golf course, and smiling at meetings while repeating words I had prepared. He liked the appearance of power, and people believed he was the one steering the ship. In truth, most of what he promised to clients only worked because I had already run the numbers and created a plan that made his words possible. My father often said Jackson had the kind of personality that opened doors. He admired that charm, convinced it was the reason we secured big projects. He never looked close enough to see who made sure those projects stayed funded and finished. I didn't expect praise, but it stung when my efforts were brushed aside, as if the long hours I poured into the office were simply expected. I became used to being overlooked. While my brother was applauded for his confidence, I worked late nights that no one noticed. He was seen as the promise of the company, while I was treated as someone who kept things ticking in the background. I told myself that was fine, that not everyone needed recognition. But deep down, I knew the business depended on me far more than anyone admitted. Looking back now, I see how blind loyalty kept me in that shadow. I gave everything to a family that believed my place was behind the curtain, supporting a brother who had no idea what real responsibility looked like. That unspoken truth was the weight I carried long before the real betrayal began. The months leading up to the wedding felt like a slow drip of disrespect. Every time I tried to step in and contribute, I was turned away. When I offered to help with planning, I was told my input wasn't needed. Yet, whenever something went wrong, a late delivery, a mix-up with the florist, or a problem with the catering, suddenly, I was the one they called to sort it out. I wasn't invited to be part of the fun, but I was expected to clean up the messes no one else wanted to deal with. There were moments that stung more than I admitted at the time. I wasn't asked to go along for dress fittings or family shopping trips, but I was asked to write the checks when vendors demanded payment. It was clear that my role wasn't to celebrate as a sister, but to act like an unpaid manager. Standing on the outside of the joyful parts while being dragged into the stressful parts made me feel less like family and more like staff. During all this, I couldn't help but notice my father's health slipping. He looked tired, thinner than before, and his energy seemed to fade quickly. I worried about him and tried to bring it up to my mother. Each time I mentioned how weak he seemed, she brushed me off with the same words. Just be happy for your brother right now. This is his time. It felt like my concerns didn't matter, like my voice had no place in the family anymore. Even with Jackson, the distance between us kept growing. We used to have a tradition of meeting once a month for dinner, just the two of us. It was the one thing that made me feel like I still had a connection with him beyond the business. But as the wedding drew closer, he canceled again and again. The third time, I asked him why he was avoiding me, and instead of an honest answer, he laughed it off. He told me I was reading too much into things, that I sounded jealous of his new life with the Blackwoods. Hearing him say that cut deeper than I expected. It wasn't just the cancellations or the dismissals. It was the steady way everyone around me acted like my feelings didn't matter. I was useful when a problem needed fixing, invisible when it came to being included, and even accused of envy when I tried to express real concern. Piece by piece, the respect I thought I had within my family was chipped away. By the time the wedding day came, I no longer felt like a sister or a daughter. I felt like an outsider waiting for the next reminder that I didn't belong. The morning of the wedding should have been joyful, But for me it began with being pulled aside by the planner. Instead of relaxing with family, I was dragged into one small problem after another. A missing delivery, a seating mix-up, a last-minute issue with the band. All of it was placed in my lap. By the time I looked at the clock, the photos with family had already been taken without me. I wasn't even told where to be, as if no one cared whether I appeared in them at all. When the ceremony ended and guests moved into the reception hall, I searched for my name among the decorated tables near the front. Each card carried a sense of belonging, but mine was nowhere to be found. I walked up and down the rows, hoping maybe I had overlooked it, yet there was nothing. I felt people's eyes on me, wondering why I was wandering between tables like I didn't belong there. The planner eventually approached, smiling in that polite but distant way, and said she had my seat ready. She led me through a side door, away from the music and laughter, into a space that smelled of food and clattering dishes. There, next to a table crowded with interns and workers, was a single card with my name. That was where they had placed me, near the kitchen, away from the family, tucked out of sight. I froze for a moment, the truth sinking in. On a day meant to unite families, I was treated as though I was part of the staff, not a sister of the groom. When I looked toward the main hall, Jackson caught my eye. I thought maybe he would call me over, or at least look embarrassed. Instead, he gave a casual shrug, as though this arrangement made perfect sense. That small gesture cut more than any words could have. Then came the final blow. Benedict Blackwood, father of the bride, strolled past and placed his hand on my shoulder. With a patronizing smile, he said, "We need capable people nearby to keep things running smoothly." His words confirmed what everyone seemed to believe, that I wasn't there as family, but as someone to manage problems. Sitting at that lonely table, I felt heat rise in my chest. The laughter from the hall spilled into the back room, sharp against the silence around me. I wasn't angry just at the humiliation, but at the ease with which they all accepted it. To them, this was natural. To me, it was the moment everything changed. I realized they didn't see me as an equal, and they never would. That quiet corner in the kitchen wasn't just a seat. It was a message, and I heard it loud and clear. Leaving the wedding that night, I carried more than embarrassment with me. I carried anger I couldn't put into words. By the time Monday came, I did the only thing that ever gave me clarity. I threw myself into work. The office was quiet, and the numbers were familiar, a language I trusted. But as I went through the accounts, something didn't add up. At first, I thought it was a minor error, maybe a transfer logged under the wrong line. But as I dug deeper, a pattern appeared. Large sums had been moving out of our accounts and landing in a company name I didn't recognize. With more research, the truth came out: the shell company belonged to Jackson. My own brother had been funneling money out of the business I worked so hard to keep strong. The total was staggering, nearly $2 million, gone under the disguise of investments tied to the Blackwoods. I stared at the figures, my hands shaking. It wasn't just reckless, it was theft, and it had been happening under my nose. All the late nights I had spent balancing budgets, all the sacrifices I made for the business, and this was how my brother treated it, as his personal fund to buy favor with his new family. I couldn't let it go. I went straight to my father, Silas, expecting outrage, maybe even disappointment in Jackson. Instead, I was met with silence that felt heavier than anger. He didn't deny it. He knew. Worse, he admitted he had approved it. He said Jackson needed a chance to prove himself with the Blackwoods, and this was a way to help him stand tall beside them. My heart sank. It wasn't just Jackson who had betrayed me, it was my father too. The man I thought would value loyalty had chosen favoritism once again, this time risking everything for the son who had never carried responsibility. I wanted to argue, to remind him who kept the company alive, but his tired expression stopped me. He looked older than I remembered, frail even, and then came the truth that made my chest tighten. He told me he was sick, dying, and had little time left. As if that wasn't enough, he revealed something worse. He had already set plans in motion for a merger with Blackwood Properties. Hartwell Construction, the company I had protected for years, would no longer be ours. It would become a piece of their empire, and in the agreement, there was no role for me. I wasn't just being pushed aside at family gatherings anymore. I was being erased from the very business I had given my life to. In that moment, I realized the betrayal wasn't just in numbers on a page. It was written in choices, in decisions made behind closed doors. And now, everything I had built was hanging by a thread, controlled by people who never saw my worth. When I learned the truth, it felt like the ground had been pulled from under me. For a short while, I could hardly breathe. The company I had devoted myself to, the family I thought I was protecting, had all been working to shut me out. The sorrow was heavy, but I knew sitting in that feeling wouldn't change anything. If they were plotting behind my back, then I had to be smarter, sharper, and ready with proof. I started quietly. The first person I went to was our longtime lawyer, a man who had been with Hartwell Construction through every lawsuit, contract, and negotiation. He had always treated me with respect, so I trusted him enough to share what I had uncovered. When I laid out the records of Jackson's shell company and the missing money, his face went pale. He didn't try to excuse it, and he didn't hesitate to back me. He told me that what I found was more than enough to take action. For the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't standing alone. Next, I spoke with our head of operations, a woman who had been on the ground with me through countless projects. She knew how hard I worked and had often told me the company wouldn't function without my oversight. When I explained what Jackson and my father were doing, her reaction was fierce. She promised she would stand by me, whatever it took. Having her support mattered because the staff respected her. If she believed in me, others would too. But I knew internal allies wouldn't be enough. The Blackwoods were powerful, and I couldn't fight them by myself. That's when I reached out to Lockwood Group, a rival developer who had been circling our business for years. They had always wanted a chance to work with us, but were blocked by our exclusive contract with the Blackwoods. When I hinted that things might be changing, their interest was immediate. They saw the opportunity, and I saw a way to weaken the hold the Blackwoods had over us. In preparing for what was coming, I went back over every line of the contract I had drawn up with the Blackwoods. That's when I remembered something important. Months earlier, I had insisted on a clause giving the chief financial officer the authority to end the agreement if a merger ever threatened the company's independence. At the time, no one paid attention to it. Now, it was the very key I needed. With evidence in hand, allies at my side, and a legal escape written into the contract, I finally felt ready. They had expected me to accept defeat, but instead, I was gathering strength piece by piece. What began as grief was now a clear plan. Protect what I had built, no matter who stood against me. The day of the meeting arrived, and I knew it would decide everything. Jackson and Benedict Blackwood had arranged it with confidence, certain I would sit quietly while they announced their plans. They imagined I would nod along as they stripped me of the company I had held together for years. What they didn't know was that I had come prepared. When I walked into the boardroom, I wasn't alone. At my side were the company lawyer and the head of operations, both ready to stand with me. Behind us, other senior managers took their seats, watching closely. The air was thick with expectation, and for once, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt like someone about to take back control. Benedict began with his usual arrogance, speaking as though everything had already been decided. He laid out the terms of the merger, explaining how Hartwell Construction would fold into Blackwood Properties. His tone was smooth, but there was no mistaking the condescension. He didn't even look at me as he spoke, as though I was irrelevant. Jackson sat beside him, smug and pleased, waiting for the approval he thought would come without resistance. When Benedict finished, I placed my folder on the table and calmly began to speak. I presented the financial records, showing the transfers to Jackson's shell company. I explained how money had been moved without proper approval, detailing each transaction so no one in the room could deny it. The silence grew heavier with every page I revealed. I glanced at my father, and for the first time, I saw real shame in his expression. His face was pale, his hands trembling. Benedict's jaw tightened, and Jackson's smugness vanished, replaced by anger. He shouted across the table, calling me bitter and accusing me of trying to ruin him. His words didn't shake me. If anything, they confirmed everything I already knew about how little respect he had for me. That was when I revealed the last piece, the clause buried in the contract with the Blackwoods. I explained clearly and firmly that as chief financial officer, I had the authority to end the agreement if a merger threatened the company's independence. Then, in front of everyone, I exercised that power. The contract was terminated effective immediately. The room erupted. Benedict's face turned red with fury, and Jackson looked like he had been struck. My father closed his eyes, devastated, but he didn't stop me. The managers who had come to watch understood what had just happened. Hartwell Construction was no longer tied to the Blackwoods. Their hold was broken. In that moment, the balance shifted. I was no longer the overlooked sister or the silent worker in the background. I had taken the one step they never thought I would. I wasn't just defending myself, I was protecting the company. That was the day I stopped being dismissed and started leading. That was the day a new CEO was born. The days after the meeting felt like standing in the middle of a storm. The decision I made had broken the hold of the Blackwoods, but the damage that followed spread faster than I expected. Projects Benedict had boasted about suddenly froze because our team refused to continue working under him. Construction sites stood silent, machines idle, and the buzz of progress was gone overnight. Without our support, deadlines were missed, and investors started calling in panic. News of the collapse traveled quickly. Blackwood Properties, once seen as untouchable, began to lose its shine. Confidence drained, and with it money. Their stock value started falling, each day worse than the last. The empire Benedict had built on charm and intimidation was exposed as fragile when people realized it relied heavily on our partnership. I had lit the spark, but the fire spread on its own. Inside my family, the cracks grew wider. Jackson's perfect image began to unravel. Isadora, who had stood proudly beside him during the wedding, now looked at him with anger and resentment. She blamed him for choosing greed over stability, for dragging her into chaos. Their fights became public, whispered about in the same circles where they once held admiration. The golden couple was already falling apart. My father did not escape the consequences either. The stress weighed on him heavily. I saw his health deteriorate day by day. The strong man who had always carried authority in every room now seemed smaller, weaker. In rare quiet moments, he admitted his mistakes. He confessed that trusting Jackson blindly had been his greatest failure. For the first time, he looked at me not as the supporting child in the background, but as the one who had saved what could still be saved. In his final days, he found the strength to set things right. He called the lawyer, made the changes official, and left me controlling interest in Hartwell Construction. It was not done out of favoritism but recognition, that I had been the one holding the company together all along. His apology was soft, almost broken, but it carried weight. He finally saw me. Yet, even with the company secured, the victory did not feel like triumph. Watching my father fade away, knowing Jackson had destroyed his own standing, and seeing a family break apart left me with more grief than celebration. I had protected the business, but it came at a cost that couldn't be ignored. I had the power now, the respect, and the position I once only dreamed of. But standing in the silence of my father's office after his passing, holding the papers that made me the owner, I felt the heavy truth. Winning did not erase the losses. I had saved Hartwell Construction, but what remained of my family was beyond repair. The price of survival was steep, and it left me carrying both the crown and the ashes. Months passed, and life slowly found a new rhythm. Hartwell Construction no longer carried the weight of uncertainty. With the Lockwood Group standing beside us, the business grew faster than I had imagined. New projects filled our schedule, and clients who once hesitated now placed their full trust in us. The company finally reflected the work and vision I had poured into it for years. Jackson had disappeared from my daily world. He tried to start again, far from the town where his name was now linked to failure. The brother I once chased after became a stranger, a man shaped by choices that cost him everything. The Blackwoods, once feared and admired, had lost their shine. Their empire shrank to pieces, their influence nothing like what it used to be. One evening, at a charity gala, I walked through the room with a sense of calm I had never felt before. People came to me with respect, not out of obligation, but because I had proven my worth. That's when Benedict Blackwood appeared. He looked older, defeated, his confidence gone. He stopped me and asked, "Was it worth it? Destroying your family just to win?" His words didn't shake me. I met his gaze and replied clearly, "I didn't destroy my family. I saved my company from the people who were willing to sell it out. This was never about revenge. It was about earning respect that was long denied." He had no answer. The man who once spoke with arrogance now stood silent. I turned and walked away, not needing to prove anything more. For the first time, I felt free, not only from the Blackwoods, but also from the role my family had forced me into. Rebuilding had not been easy. It came with loss, with pain, with lonely nights where I questioned everything. But as I stood in that room, surrounded by people who finally saw me as I was, I understood that respect was never given. It was taken, earned, and protected. Hartwell Construction was thriving. My voice was finally heard, and my future was mine to shape. I had stepped out of the shadows, and I was never going back. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away and protecting my company? Or should I have given my family another chance? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear more of my story and others like it, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss one.